That moves us to the discussion agenda, starting with our fiscal year 2024 annual comprehensive financial report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Reporting to the lectern is our CFO, Ms. Heather Tucker, with our visitors from to present our annual comprehensive financial report.
Hi, good evening, Madam Chair, Dr. Ross, board members. Just wanted to welcome tonight. We have Josh Garvin and Luke Vickery here from Manley Garvin to present our annual comprehensive financial report. But I would be remiss to say a thank you right now to the finance team. Connie Frick and Leanne London are here representing our finance team. What I have learned in my 6-ish months here in the district is that school district finances are incredibly complicated. Ours is even more so, working in 2 counties, getting revenue from 2 different places. And there's a lot of complexity to it, and in a district our size, it's the sheer volume. And so just wanted to thank our finance department for their work and their effort on an everyday basis to make sure that our financials are clean and that they are accurate as often as possible, and everything is presented in a way that is correct. And so obviously we're human, so just wanted to thank them for their work. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Luke Vickery and Josh Garvin from Manley Garvin. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. All right. Thank you, Superintendent and Board, for the opportunity to work with you guys this year. As Heather mentioned, we are presenting your annual comprehensive financial report as of June 30th, 2024. You have 3 documents in front of you, or you should have. One is the actual annual financial report. It should be a bound copy. And then you should have what we call our SAS 114 report, and a very small report that I call our board summary report. And I will stick to our board summary report, but we'll certainly take questions once I get through the board summary report. But what we're pleased to present tonight in the annual financial report is that we've issued an unmodified opinion over your financial statements as of June 30th, 2024. That's found on page 12 of the ACFR. The unmodified opinion, you say, Luke, what does that mean? That is a clean opinion. That is the highest opinion that we can give your financial statements as your external auditors. That means that you can pick these financials up and know that you can make decisions on these financial statements. That does not mean that every penny is accurate. There's certainly materiality that's built into these financial statements, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into some other documents. But these financial statements, you can pick these up and know that these financial statements can be used to make decisions. Again, these financial statements are as of June 30th, 2024, so they're a bit dated just with the inherent nature of an audit. So I don't want to spend too much time on the numbers and getting in the weeds, but I will try to summarize some of the numbers for you. So again, we issued our opinion on December the 2nd, 2024, and you'll see your general fund balance increased by about $7.4 million. There's a general fund trend analysis that we'll look at subsequent to this, but your debt service fund increased by about $500,000. Your capital projects increased by about $8.2 million, and your food service fund increased by about $1.9 million. The other 2 opinions is, as a district, we come in, we issue 3 opinions. The first we just talked about as a clean opinion over your financial statements. Those are the numbers. The second opinion is found on page 132 of the ACFR. That is our opinion over your internal controls. So as a school district, we're required to come in and test your internal controls more heavily than you would say a for-profit entity. And so we test your internal controls much more invasively. And if we found any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls, so big things that were amiss in your internal controls, we would put those findings in that report. That said, there are none. We're issued a clean opinion over your internal controls. The third opinion is over the single audit. That is on page 134. Because the school district spends more than $750,000 of federal funds, we're required to come in and test the internal controls over those programs and if the money was spent in compliance with the federal government. So in this single audit, we were required to test the IDEA cluster and the child nutrition. So 2 programs that we went in and tested the internal controls over those 2 programs and the compliance with federal regulations and spending those monies. And again, we issued an unmodified or a clean opinion over those. Those are the 3 opinions. So the clean opinion on all 3 of those. I will move over to the next page. You can see the budget to actual, again, sticking to the summary page. And so you can see that our revenues were a bit more above what we budgeted, and this is the final budget, about $7 million. And our expenditures were about $600,000 less in your general fund than what we budgeted. So your net change in fund balance for the general fund was about $7.4 million. Going to the next page of, again, the board summary packet, you can see the increase and fluctuations of your fund balance throughout the last 5 years. And so this year, the school district ended the year with 2.75 months of unassigned fund balance for the year ended June 30th, 2024. That means that if you take your total expenses in the general fund, divide them by 12, and look at what was unassigned, we could operate for 2.75 months on hand as of year end. Now that number is within the GFOA recommendations. The GFOA, which is the Government Financial Officers Association, recommends 2 to 6 months for a school district, for a government to maintain on hand. So 2.75, you were within that recommendation. That said, I will note that the next report is the report to the Board of Trustees. This is a draft of this report, and I will certainly get the updated issued copy to you as soon as I can. But this report is essentially our communication of the audit process to the board. So a lot of the accounting fiascos that have occurred over the last couple decades have primarily occurred or are being encouraged by auditors' lack of communication with the board. So there were issues during the audit, and they were not communicating with the board. And so this report gives us one opportunity to say, hey, there are issues that may not rise to the level of the financial report, but we still want to make you aware of those. That said, there are none that are in there. This report is also a plain English version of the audit, as much as it's one can be. It talks about materiality. Again, I mentioned that earlier. We don't audit every penny of the district. There's certainly materiality that is inherent in these financial statements. If we were auditing every penny, we would be with the finance team year-round, and you would be getting calls and saying, hey, please get these people out of my office. While we enjoy working with them, I'm sure they don't enjoy working with us that much. So materiality inherently in these numbers. There's also estimates. A lot of the buildings or vehicles, we estimate that those will last over a certain period of time, but that's just an estimate. A vehicle, it could last 15 years, it could last 2 for a variety of reasons. So there's estimates that are certainly built into these financial statements. So again, this report, if you're going to understand the audit process and what we have done as far as a risk assessment, this report is where I would start. That again is the financial statements as of the June 30th, 2024. Our firm we're a local firm out of Greenwood, South Carolina. We specialize in audits of governments and not-for-profits. And I can tell you that working with your team, you have one of the better teams that I've ever worked with as far as a finance team. And I don't say that lightly. They are extremely responsive to all my questions. The audit process, as Heather mentioned, is tough. You guys are complex, and we spend a lot of time auditing these books. But any question I have, anything that we need to work through, this team over here will always be extremely responsive. If other teams were responsive and as knowledgeable, my job would be a lot easier. I really appreciate the team that you guys have and working with them through all my questions and concerns as we've gone through the audit process. But that said, is there any questions about the annual financial report that I can answer at this time?
Thank you. Do we have Ms. Huddle?
Yes. So on the liabilities, there's a arbitrage rebate liability of $1,747,000. And I asked about this before the meeting, and we were sent a attachment calculating that. And I think we have till 2027, so this is a liability for a future payment, correct?
Correct, Ms. Huddle. This is a liability, and Leanne, correct me if I'm wrong, this is related to the bonds that were taken out for Irma High School. And so this would be the liability if we do not spend those funds in a timely manner. And so this was a calculated liability, but we have until that date in 2027 to pay down those funds without incurring this liability. So this is one of those estimates.
Okay, so two questions. One is, correct me if I'm wrong, but arbitrage, the reason we would have this liability would be to the IRS, correct? And it would be because we earned more money on the funds that we received from taxpayers than the interest that we would pay on those bonds. And since they're tax-free bonds, that's why arbitrage exists, correct? Okay. Second question is, some of this incurred no matter what. In other words, because this period has gone along since 2022 and the interest that we have earned has been greater than what we paid, even if we pay all this money by 2027, aren't we still going to owe some of this?
I'm not 100% sure about this, but my understanding is that we have certain deadlines to meet, and as we meet those deadlines, paying this down, that liability decreases. And so I can get you a specific answer on those deadlines and the time period and what if any, we will owe based on what we've incurred already. So I can get you a specific answer.
Okay. May I ask one more question? Okay. In looking at the worksheets that we received, it looked like these bonds were issued at a premium. So if you issue $10 million in bonds, you can actually issue them at a premium and sell $11 million in bonds, and you can pay a higher interest rate on those bonds. So the net is a lower interest rate, and investors get that. If these bonds, and this may be a question for the auditor, if these bonds had been issued at par, then the liability would not be as great, correct?
The liability, are you referring to the arbitrage liability?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. My gut tells me that is correct, but I don't want to give you a professional opinion without seeing some numbers officially, if that is sufficient. But
It's not surprising that we've gone many years without seeing arbitrage, and the reason being is that interest rates have been so suppressed. So as interest rates come up and you're earning more money on the dollars that are sitting there, it's not surprising to see those arbitrage liabilities pop up. But to kind of piggyback off Luke's response, we're not bond attorneys and we're not experts in arbitrage calculations.
Ms. Heiser is
She
raising her
wants to
hand.
speak. Please, come forth.
So I am not the tax lawyer that does the tax support work for the bonds that I help y'all issue. And y'all do have a rebate advisory firm that works with the staff on an ongoing basis. When we sell your general obligation bonds, they are sold at a public sale, and the bidders come from all over the country, large banks, small banks, whatever. It's the marketplace that determines whether or not you get a premium. We generally would not, in a notice of sale, have as a condition of the sale no premium. And because the marketplace is going to give you a better all-in interest rate if the premium process is available. Technically, premium is what we call prepaid interest. You do not issue additional debt. Using a $10 million bond issue, if you get $1 million of premium, you are still only issuing $10 million of debt. you would be repaying $11 million, but you have then received that $1 million in upfront monies. So just to be clear, it's not really something that the school district determines whether or not you want a premium.
I mean, to be fair, the school district could issue bonds not at a premium. I mean, the investors know that if the going rate is 3% and there's a premium, it averages out. I mean, they get that. I guess my question was, in my reading of it, and I'm not hearing anybody tell different, is that part of the reason that there's this arbitrage, I get it, interest rates have been high compared to when the debt was issued, but part of the reason is that these were mainly, I think, 5%, and they were at a premium, whereas if we had paid 4% without a premium, and I'm just throwing out round numbers, there might not be as much arbitrage.
Yeah, I'd be
This is
glad
Jay
to come
Glover from
back
PFM. I'm on the line virtually.
and
Can
give
I chime
you
in? Can y'all
a
hear me?
detailed answer. Is Jay,
Yeah, this is Jay Glover
your
from
financial
PFM. Can you all
advisor
hear me?
is
Can you all hear me? Because I can think I can help address this.
I mean, we didn't know you
Yeah.
were there, so you came in pretty hot.
Yeah.
But we can hear you.
Sorry, again, Jay Glover from PFM. We're the district's financial advisor on debt-related matters. And I think we're talking about the 2022 GO bonds. Is that correct? That have the arbitrage liability? So those bonds were actually non-callable bonds because they only had a maturity of less than 10 years. So the fact that they were issued at a premium does not impact the arbitrage yield on those bonds. Whether they were issued at par, a discount, or a premium, that arbitrage yield would be essentially the same. I think when premium bonds will impact your arbitrage yield is if the bonds are callable, just to get into the weeds a little bit. And the reason this has a positive liability, which is not a bad thing, is the arbitrage yield on these bonds was 2.18%. And since we issued those fixed rate bonds, obviously those proceeds as they were being spent were invested at rates as rates increased well above that. So that's why you've accrued this liability. I don't think any penalty is due until the 5-year mark on these bonds. And I'm assuming the district is setting aside those funds to make that liability payment. But it's while it sounds like a bad thing, it means you're maximizing your interest earnings and getting the maximum amount of proceeds available for projects. But you will likely have to rebate anything earned above that 2.18%, because like most districts, you don't meet a spend down exception, which requires you to spend the proceeds within 2 years to keep positive arbitrage. So sorry if I came in kind of hot there, but I did want to address that question because you're on point. If the bonds are callable, it will impact your arbitrage yield. But the fact that these were non-callable, the premium and discount or par nature does not impact the arbitrage yield.
Mrs. Huddle?
So, Mr. Glover, unless interest rates tank severely between now and 2027, we are probably going to owe a good portion of this.
Yeah, so unless, again, short-term rates go below that 2.18%, and thus you're accruing negative arbitrage to offset the positive arbitrage, you're going to have to rebate that liability back to the IRS. And again, I think the district is probably setting those funds aside in an account to make that payment, but you're not required to do that until I think the 5th anniversary of the issuance of the bonds.
Okay, and the callable is the feature that makes it subject to arbitrage?
No, and I'm sorry, this is a lot in the weeds,
non-callable?
but yeah, so if bonds are callable, they're actually priced to that call date, which would drive that arbitrage yield down if they're premium bonds, which I think is what you were getting at. So you're on point that if premium callable bonds are issued, that would drive the arbitrage yield down and limit how much investment earnings you could earn up to that arbitrage yield. But since these bonds are non-callable, they're priced to their maturity date, so that is not impacting the arbitrage yield. So for instance, if we did a 20-year bond deal at a premium, that would drive your arbitrage yield down versus doing a 20-year bond at par. But for a 10-year bond or less that's non-callable, it does not impact that.
if I could, Jay, in a little bit, we're going to be talking about the first issuance of the referendum debt. When we get to that point, I might ask you to come back and talk about the advisability of having a condition of sale be par only and no premium bonds, if you'd be thinking about that.
Yeah, we can discuss that as part, because that will be relevant to a 20-year bond deal that will have a 10-year call provision on it. So happy to revisit that at that time.
I think, Mr. Scully?
Yeah, just to kind of bring this back for the public's benefit, in the execution of the bonds, did the district act in any way that was uncommon or detrimental to our interests?
Yeah.
You got an interest rate of a little over 2%, which is excellent. The fact that you're able to invest the bond proceeds at a higher interest rate is simply the fact that in the last 3 years, interest rates have gone up. 6 years ago, you might have gotten an interest rate of 1.5% that you paid on the bonds, but your investment rate would have been like 0.25%. And as Mr. Glover said, it is, I think, an absolute truism that paying rebate is not a bad thing as long as you have not spent the money that you need to rebate back to the IRS, which is why you have the rebate analyst working from the beginning, which is why you set aside the funds. And so the payment just means that the school district has maximized and earned every penny it could earn in interest on unspent bond proceeds, and you're able to keep part of it, and above that certain point, you have to send it back to the federal government.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? All right, thank you.
And I just want to thank Manley Garvin for all of their work on this. Like Luke said, they were very responsive to our questions and helping us finish this in a timely manner. So just want to really thank them for their work on this as well. So thank you.
Ms. Tucker, thank you and your team too for the support that you provided them. I think you are sticking around for the next item, which is the discussion of resolution authorizing the issuance of not to exceed $80 million of debt approved by the referendum.
Yes, so as you've seen, we have Jay Glover here as well as Franny to speak about this, but we have attached for your consideration the resolution authorizing the issuance of our general obligation bonds not to exceed $80 million. This is essentially the first iteration of our referendum bond debt, and so just wanted to bring this resolution to you to discuss and to ask or answer any questions that you may have.
All right. Do we have any questions? Ms. Huddle?
So going back to our other discussion, is part of the reason that we have arbitrage that we had the money basically sitting in the bank and not spending it. So I guess a question I have is it a good thing to borrow $80 million that right now that you can't spend for, I mean, how much, I guess, what's the budget? When are we going to spend this $80 million is maybe a better way to put it.
So we are working through that. As Dr. Ross has mentioned, we want to move as quickly but as smartly as possible as we move forward on these. Obviously, the longer we wait, the more construction costs are going to go up, and so we're being mindful of that. But working, we have a great team, Dave, myself, Alan, and we've been working. In fact, we have a conference room over in facilities where we have a timeline of all the projects, what they cost, you know, when the A&E goes out, how long is that process going to take? And so we're trying to lay all of that out so we have a very clear visual of not only the timeline, but the cost of each project, and then breaking down those costs into the A&E, then the construction, and the closeout. So all of those steps. And so we were trying to be very mindful of doing that in a quick but efficient manner. And so we wanted to essentially issue this first iteration of those $80 million to get that started, because we realize we're going to incur quite a few costs up front as far as the architecture and engineering and getting some of these things going. And so we need those funds available. And so that's why we chunked it in those three, I guess, $80 million. And we have time to issue those, or we have time to spend that down without any penalties, essentially. And so
there are a number of things we call sort of conventional wisdom, things that we see in the work I do and the work Jay does. very often an issuer will look at what will we spend over the next 3 years. And so that's one thing that we look at. I would note that this resolution authorizes not exceeding $80 million. The actual sale of the bonds, I think, is scheduled for March. And if the team, Dr. Ross, and the team here at the school district said, you know, we're probably not going to need but $60 million to get this up and running, then that number could be decreased. I think as you shared the financing plans with the public, it appeared that you were going to do 3 equal issues of $80 million. Honestly, you know, the second issue, you may need $100 million and then a smaller amount to finish up. Jay will be the one to make sure that as these bonds are issued and structured, the whole $240 million, that you stay within the millage limit that you projected to the public. So there are a lot of moving pieces about how much to issue and exactly when, but we take our cues from your senior administration, and would not don't want to over issue, but you also don't want to, you know, issue and incur expenses and then have to issue again.
If say they need less in March and say they only issue 20 million, does that affect the contract for the construction management firm if they're based off of 80 million?
So right now, if you can talk a little bit about the look-back opportunities we have here. I think one of the things that we're trying to do is move forward with time. So we have a lot of solicitations going through so that we can get the bidding, so that we can get the actual prices. But now what we're using is fund balance assignment to pay for everything. So we're not even spending bond proceeds, we're spending fund balance assignment. So I think we wrote in this a 60-day look back that could help give us some optionalities on using bond proceeds to pay for construction management.
Exactly. There is language, so I think it's paragraph 18, that we call our reimbursement language. It is the official declaration of intent by this board that expenditures that are made prior to the issuance of the bonds will be reimbursed to the fund from which those funds came. To the extent that you're using general fund monies and you want to get that, you want to have those funds reimbursed as quickly as possible, because there are no IRS limits and there are no arbitrage issues with respect to your cash. And so using cash to get things going, but having the bond proceeds available to repay what you have expended is a strategy that we would recommend you consider, because cash is king. You know, you can earn whatever you can in the LGIP or wherever y'all's funds are invested without fear of positive arbitrage, rebate liability, and things like that.
I'll just, Mr. Banham, on the construction management contract, right now that is just the construction of Dutch Fork, the new Dutch Fork Elementary School, the 2 wings at LMES and CES, and there's one more.
The renovations in the new elementary school.
Okay, the renovations in the new elementary school. So there's just 3 projects that are in that current contract. So it's not based on a percentage of the $80 million. It's based on a percentage of those 3 projects. So we limited the first solicitation for construction management firms to just those. So just wanted to clear that up.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Mr. Herring?
When would you actually pay the construction management company? Does that happen up front, or is that after the fact?
So the construction management company would get paid based on milestones throughout the project. So there would be paid percentage, well, their total percentage, but then as certain milestones of the projects are reached, then they essentially would have a pay application for a certain percentage as that moves along. Dave, did I miss anything? Okay. It's monthly, so it's monthly based on those percentages.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay.
Y'all have a pleasant holiday season, and we'll see y'all back here, I think, on January the 13th.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank y'all. All right, we have been asked to group discussion agenda items 19 through 22 together. Dr. Ross, I'll let you elaborate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Act 114 has impacted our operations and our instructional programs with the revision to Read to Succeed, it has now impacted a lot of policies. So we're asking if we can take all of these up in one discussion, even though they're different policies. So with that, I'll turn the mic over to the floor to our Chief of Academics, Ms. Tina McCaskill.
Good evening. Just like Dr. Ross said, policy IHAA, which is the ELA instructional policy, IHCA, the summer school policy, IKE, which is promotion and retention, and then ILBB, the state program assessments, all are wrapped around the Read to Succeed requirements. I can read through those for you, or I could just stand for questions. Which is best for you?
Do we have any questions?
I think everybody wants questions.
Ms. Huddle?
So a lot of this is because of the new reading program, right? Kind of related to this, it's kind of tangential, but I'd heard that some of the colleges weren't teaching it yet. Has that changed? You know, and it kind of goes to recruiting, like that if people are graduating from college and they're not learning letters, how do we deal with that?
So I will tell you, we partner closely with University of South Carolina, and I'll use Beth White as one of their professors that works directly with our schools, and she's actually taking letters herself and incorporating that into her coursework that she does with her students within the schools. So I do know that USC is utilizing the science of reading, which is what you're referencing, I believe.
Okay. And then the other question I had is on the students, the third grade students that may be held back. How much information is shared with their parents, and how do their parents know, and is it repetitive? You know, I just don't want parents, you know, I'm sure you guys are doing it, so I'm just curious what y'all are doing.
Sure. So by law, January of a child's third grade year, you have to have parent conferences with those students who are showing that they're at risk. And we utilize our MAP data. The cut score now with the new does not meet is 186 for MAP. So anyone who would be around a 190 or below, because that's a little bit above the cut score but still in that kind of iffy range, we'll have meetings with in January. That's third grade. But we do the same thing whenever we see students who are at risk in second grade. We have intervention that starts in kindergarten, first grade, and parents are part of that process throughout. In fact, they're not served in intervention without parents being aware of that, and there's forms and letters that go home with that. So there's constant communication to parents about where their students are and what's going on in terms of remediation or what needs are there. So there's constant communication about that. But like I said, the law requires starting January of the third grade year, you have a very detailed parent conference. There's a form that goes home, parents sign it. Starting this coming year, part of that is actually a plan that parents are part of creating where you outline what that supplemental instruction is going to look like. That's something that we've done a little, maybe not as formally as what now the law requires, but we've always done that. But now there's a formal plan that has to be put in place for those students.
Thank you. Mr. Satterfield, and then...
Yeah, I had one question. I was looking at both policies, and I noticed, I was looking at the wording. Maybe you can clarify for me. If I am below reading level in first and second grade, is summer reading camp mandatory?
So this year you will not be, but next year, first grade will be, so 26, 27, first grade will be added, and then the following year, second grade will be, or second grade's added first, and then first grade's added, excuse me, I said it backwards.
Yeah.
So second grade's added first, and then first grade is added. So there will be a mandatory, and that will be based on the interim assessments that we give, which currently is MAP.
Now, how about third grade? Because I noticed it was handled a little differently. And third grade's the retention year, right?
So third grade, there's still the requirement, if you're in the does not meet category, you're required to either meet a good cause exemption, which there are 4 things that are listed there. It has to do with your English, ESL, EL, your ML students, let me say it the right way now, your ML students, whether they have an IEP, whether they are, it just went away from me. I need to look it up. But there's four of them, and I can find them if you need me to say them. But there's 4 of those. There's actually another thing that doesn't show up in these policies that is in the law that allows for one slight tweak to the good cause exemption. So this is what would help a child. Let's say I took MAP in March, and I made a 190 on MAP. The cut score is 186. But then I went into the SC Ready, and I made does not meet. That would say that I have to go to summer reading camp. I'd have to be retained if I didn't meet it at the end of summer reading camp. As a teacher, the teacher can actually write up a proposal to her principal, his or her principal, and say that that child should not be retained because of the MAP score. And the principal can then say, okay, I see that, that's approved. It would then go to Dr. Ross as the superintendent. He would then have to approve that. There's actually, you can actually look at their IEP, you can look at their ESOL status, and you can look at whether or not, I'm going to pull that because I told y'all my brain just went totally away, and I've got it sitting right here, so there's no need for me not to pull it. So you've got 2 years of reading intervention and prior retention. That was the one that was going away from me. So if those things were in place, those are all good cause exemptions anyway.
Right.
The only thing that's not a good cause exemption is a prior MAP score that's above the 186 cut score. So that's in addition to a way that a child would not be retained.
If they, and excuse me for all the questions, I was just curious about this because this is really going to impact schools. It's going to be one of the biggest things that impact elementary schools especially. Will there be an evaluation after reading camp?
Yes. And so at the end of reading camp, all the students will take MAP. This year it's MAP. And they have to make a 186 or they have to make a 187 or higher because the 186 is the cut score.
You know, I think it's going to be great for those schools that have consistent students, first, second, and third. But for those schools where we have a lot of turnover, if you have a large number of third graders that move in, that's going to present quite a challenge for those schools especially. I mean, you have not had the opportunity to have them in first and second, and now you get them in third wherever they are, and
it's going to be challenging.
Yeah.
It's going to be challenging.
Mr. Herring?
I have 3 questions, but I think they'll be quick. I pointed this out to Dr. Ross. In the proposed policy, you still have the inclusion of the lapse, which I think are not really allowed as a good cause exemption.
Can you tell me where that is? Because the lap should not be in
it's
there.
it's on page 8.
On which one?
On exhibit, K. It still references a lapse as a good cause exemption. So that certainly would need to be removed.
Okay, I'm going to that now to find it. 'Cause that should not be on there.
It's under the bulleted list on page 8. And I may be wrong. I wanted to point that out.
Which bullet list on the top of page 8?
Who demonstrates, that's the next to last one, demonstrates mastery of state standards in reading equal to or at least above the lowest achievement level on the state reading assessment through a reading portfolio.
You're exactly right. That should come off. Thank you.
The second question. I told you these are easy ones. I'm aware that some other districts, after SC Ready, will re-administer MAP, and the state flowchart, a timeline, doesn't say when that has to be done. So can we retain that as an option to try to target some of those students who may have improved their MAP score, retest them in MAP, or whatever one of the other 3 alternative assessments, to try to catch maybe a few of those kids who really don't need to go to summer school?
We can. If we do that, we only test MAP 4 times a year. That's what we're allowed to test. So if we test them like the end of May, then that's it. If they don't make it, then summer reading camp's not an option for them.
Got it.
So that's where we have to be a little bit careful with that.
Understood.
But we now can use previous MAP scores.
Right.
So you can use fall, winter, or spring. If they performed better on that, we can use that.
So you can use fall?
We can.
There are definitely teachers in our state right now that don't understand that. I have heard that twice in the past
Well, I
week.
actually just emailed the State Department today to get clarification on it, so I have it in writing.
Great. I'll make sure to share that. And the flowchart also includes an appeal option, which I noticed we did have in the previous policy, but we have removed that option. I would like to understand why that is.
So it does say the appeal process, we do have that in 3rd grade, the parent has an appeal process. That is the only grade level that there's an actual parent appeal process for retention.
But that's all struck through in the policy.
Not for 3rd grade. It's somewhere in here, and I'll have to find it.
It's actually
for
on
you.
the same page that I was referencing the lapse. It's the appeal for retention determination.
But it does have it somewhere for 3rd grade. It may not be there, but it is. I may have to come back to you and find it, but I've read it, so I know it's supposed to have been in there somewhere.
Okay.
Okay, no, that's about the tutoring. But yes, you're right. The 3rd grade parent does have the right to appeal. Now, if it's not here, then I have read it somewhere and it's not showing
It's
up.
for discussion anyway. I can even point it out
But we
later.
can,
It's
I
fine.
can go back and if I find it, I'll bring it back next time.
Thank
But if
you.
not, it'll be added next time. How about that?
Thank you.
Ms. Huddle?
One question I'm curious about is, in your opinion, we're having to do this basically because the state says we have to do that. And it all makes sense, right? We want kids to be able to read, and statistically, if they don't read by 3rd grade, it's very hard. But the question I have is, and I realize there are limited resources, but would we be better off focusing, we have to do this, but should we also focus more on like kindergarten and 1st grade? And in other words, is it easier if a child is going to be left behind because they can't read? Is it better for the child for that to happen earlier than 3rd grade? And so that's part 1. And then part 2, if so, we as a district, is there something we should do about that?
Dr. Ross and I just had this conversation today, actually. I'm not a huge proponent of retention, but I do believe the earlier we retain a child, the better. So I do believe and we've talked to schools about this, that we really need to look at kindergarten, 1st graders, that if they are excessively behind in reading, that we should be looking at whether that's the better place for retention for them, which then also leads into the good cause exemption in 3rd grade because they would have already had 1 year of retention, and should have at that point had some 2 years of intervention, because that's one of the good cause exemptions is the retention with 2 years of intervention. So I do believe that that is something that we need to look at and probably focus a little more on. What I don't want to happen is one of the good cause exemptions says that they've had an IEP for 2 years with reading goals. And I don't want us to jump directly from the child struggling in first grade, let's go ahead and put them on an IEP because that gives them 2 years of reading goals. So that's what I don't want to happen, but I do believe that the earlier we intervene, the better. And sometimes retention may be one of those intervention strategies that we need to use.
Mr. Herron?
Just would advocate for robust investment into interventionists and other strategies to mitigate this in the first grade and in the second grade.
Absolutely, yes.
All right, do we have any more questions? All right, thank you, Ms. McCaskill. Are you up here for the next
I
one?
still get to stay.
Moving right on to proposed revisions to board policy IKF, graduation requirements.
Okay, this is a fairly easy one. The only change to this is a definition that is added about making sure that it's not just that that they pass the course with 120 hours of coursework, but that they actually master the content within the course. So it's a pretty simple change to the policy, but one that was recommended by the School Boards Association that we felt was something that was necessary.
Any questions? All right. Guess we decided to let you off the hook on the last one for the night. Thank you, Ms. McCaskill.
Thank you.
That brings us to item number 24 on the discussion agenda, which is a January 2025 board workshop. And, okay, apparently I'm leading that conversation. I do think that it would be important for us to meet in the beginning of the new year just to establish mainly our board goals and priorities for the year. And I'd like us to try to do that ahead of the district working on budget and sort of those things. And obviously we'll be open to hearing from you all on things that you may think are important for us to cover in the workshop as well. Ms. Huddle?
One question I have is, usually when it's phrased as a workshop, it means there's no votes taken. And I don't know how you can collectively agree on anything without votes being taken. So I would just suggest if we're going to be setting priorities that we make it a voting meeting so that we're agreeing.
What is it? Is that okay?
I think you would just have to establish an action agenda after the workshop.
Okay.
Yes. The workshop would be more of planning, and then you would have to go into a publicly, we would have to FOIA and meet the requirements of notifying the public of action after that workshop.
Okay. Just making note. Does anyone else have thoughts regarding the workshop? Mr. Satterfield?
Yeah, I'd like to say that the last workshop we had, I found extremely helpful, especially for new board members coming in. Not only did we get a chance in a very relaxed environment to talk about, you know, what sort of example we want to set for the public, some little basic procedures and things that we want to follow. They weren't really policies, but they were things that help us all work together. And not that we all need to agree on everything. Obviously, that's why you have 7 members. But the idea was to just familiarize the new board member with some of the operations and how things go, and to get a chance to do a little team building. And I would really highly suggest that. I think that would be very helpful for our school board. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just making notes. It's my understanding, I think what we'll do is circulate some dates to the board following the meeting. It's my hope that this will be attended by all 7 of us so that we can get on the same page in terms of what we want to try to accomplish in the upcoming year. Anybody else? Thoughts, suggestions, questions? All right, well, I'll get with Ms. White on some potential dates, and we'll get those out as soon as possible so that everybody can get that on their calendar. All right, if all hearts and minds are, Mr. Satterfield?
I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Can I get a second? All in favor? Opposed? And that motion carries 6-0. Y'all have a good night.